Good evening, everyone. Hope you're doing well there.
Good evening, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Oh, good morning.
Okay, you're very thoughtful. Okay, here we go. I guess I should do Facebook. Just give me a second. And Chodesh Tov too. Okay. Yeah, so we spoke about last time a person who, says a prayer about something which is in the past. So we said it's not proper to do that. So now he brings the sources for this. He says in the Bet Yosef, Hakol Peret Aroeh. Where is it coming from? Nun Dal Amud Aleph in Brachot Samech. And Be'al Nichnas Lekach Bet Beresh Rashi. So regarding entering into a city, Rashi explains, Hamalech B'derech V'tzarich La'avor Kirach. Right. So a person is going on the road. He needs to pass by a certain city, traverse the city, and Moshlim Ra'im, and you have their bad administration, some bad government there. And and therefore, it's dangerous because they could, find some kind of a accusation on you, even though it's not true, false accusations. That's what he's saying. So it says there in the Gemara in the last text there, "Te'afilu b'krach shedanim ve'orgim." So these, even in a town which they do judge and kill people, right? So in other words, there is an administration there. There is some kind of law and order. That's what he's trying to say. The problem is, sometimes you can't find a person who can be your defense lawyer. Defense lawyer. Right? So, that's the problem. Uh, so, כלומר, שאף על פי שהוא מקום שיש בו שופטים, so mean to say that even though it's a place where our judges there, שאין הורגים, אלא בדין, so they only judge, according to the law. They only kill according to the law. אפילו הכי חיישינן שמתוך שהוא נוכרי, so he says, nevertheless, we're concerned that since he's a goy, לא יזדמן מי שילמד עליו זכות. There won't be anybody, who to defend him there, defense lawyer. וילכד ברשת עלילה שהעלילו עליו. So therefore, right, he's going to be caught in the web, right, of the accusations, false accusations, so forth, so on. Yeah, we shouldn't see from that, right? That's not a good situation. ותפילת הדרך im, okay, that's, so he's done with that. And then he says, עם חתימתה וכל משפטיה כתב רבנו בסימן ק"י. So he says, if you're going to ask me about Tfilat HaDerech, right, the traveler's prayer, that's where we already did that in Kufyud, right? So I guess he doesn't want to reiterate that over here. Yeah, we covered it already. So, ומפשט השמועות, נראה שהצליחוהו להתפלל על שלום הדרך פעמיים, אחד בעת שיוצא מן הכרך, ואחד ואינו חותם בה. So he says, according to the language of the Talmud, right, this Talmudic discussion, it seems like there's two prayers going on for this scenario. So what does that mean? Um, One is when he comes out, from that town. He leaves the town. No chotem, he doesn't conclude there, right, with a conclusion, with a seal. So he says that's what it says in פרק הרואה, ואחרת שהוא חותם בה כדאיתא בסוף פרק תפילת השחר. There's also another one that he seals with, like it says in this פרק, כ"ט עמוד ב', ויש לתמוע תרתי למה לי. So he says, right, the question is, why do you need two of them? והיה ראוי לתקן חתימה בזו, and also, right, it should have been that this one has a seal, the one you say finally. It seems like it's the primary prayer there, or blessing, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, blessing. חתימה בזו, ושמתפלל כשיוצא בשלום. So he's going to pray when he comes out, safely from that place. So this one should be the long one, the primary one. וכן מצאתי לחובו שכתב בסימן. He says, I found this in the Kobo, this claim. He wrote in the Siman Pei Zayin, הנכנס לכרך מתפלל שתיים. So he says, when he comes into the town, he prays two things there. בכניסתו אומר, when he comes in, what does he pray? יהי רצון מלפניך. May it be the will before you. וכו', etc. We're going to see the text of the prayer, right? That in בעזרת השם. נכנס בשלום, אומר מודה אני לפניך. So if he came in there peacefully, he thanks God, says, I give thanks to you, so forth, so on. יצא בשלום, אומר מודה אני לפניך, אדוני אלוהי. So once he comes out peacefully from that place, from that town, he says, I give thanks to you, right? The Lord our God, whatever, Eloha, שהוצאתני מכרך זה לשלום. That you took me out from this town, right, in peace. כשם שהוצאני איתם מזה בשלום, כך תוליכני לשלום ותעשידני לשלום. Just like you took me out of peace from this town, right? Do the same with all the other towns as well. Likewise. So then he says, Baruch atah Hashem. How do you seal it? Shomea tefillah, right? So in other words, what is he trying to say from here? What's the point? The point is that this corroborates what he was saying before, according to this text and according to this rabbi, that you should seal the final blessing there when you come out peacefully, because that's the main objective here, to come out peacefully from there. You reached your objective, so you should bless there. That's what he's trying to say. Okay, great. So that's the end of this piece. So let's go to Shulchan Aruch. And we'll see, hopefully, the whole text, right, of the prayer regarding this. What the prayer is, what the blessing is. So says Shulchan Aruch, המתפלל על מה שעבר. He prays on something which was in the past, as we said. Improper to do that. So he gives you an example, right? שנכנס לעיר ושמע קול צוואתך בעיר. So for instance, right, he went to a certain town. He entered the town. He heard some outcry going on there. And ואמר, יהי רצון שלא יהיה כל זה בתוך ביתי. So he prays, yeah, may it be the will before you that this should not be going on in my house. Well, it's a little bit late to say that, right? Either it is going on there or it's not going on there. How's it going to change by you asking for that now? That's the thing. So since the prayer is not really relevant, because in terms of chronology, it's too late. So therefore, a person shouldn't make a prayer like this. That last time, right? What's the problem with making this prayer? The problem is that, since you're doing something which is not logical, no relevance to it, you're just bothering them, in heaven, for asking for things, like you're some kind of some kind of prima donna, Yeah, let me get that too. Let me get that. What are you? If it's not relevant, don't ask for things which are not relevant, because Hashem cannot change, the reality, just to suit you. It's not the way it works. That's the whole point. Okay, so then he says, right, Yiratzon, uh, or another, he brings another scenario. Let's say his wife was pregnant, Achara Mem Yom Libura, and she's already 40 days, into the pregnancy. So we already said last time, right? What's irrelevant? Why is that relevant? Because, after the 40 days, the gender is already determined, So what are you going to do now? Ask for a different gender? What do you want God to do, to change the gender for you? Right? That's like a miracle, So don't forget about that. You're not Leah, right? And Rachel, you're not in that situation. So forget about it, right? Okay. Like we described last time. So that's the reason why you don't want to say that. So Yiratzon shetered ishti zachar, and then he prays, right? Oh yeah, maybe the will that my wife should bear a boy child, right? What do you mean boy child? It's too late already to pray for that. Gender has already been determined. Yeah. If you want to know what right, if you want to know what the gender is, go get an ultrasound. You know what I mean? But don't waste your time. Don't bother Hashem for this. That's the thing. Okay, great. So so he says, right, this is considered to be a blessing, a prayer in vain, which is not a good thing, as we said. So he says, therefore, right, what should a person do? Bless on things, which have not occurred yet, not bless, pray, whatever, pray for that. So, some Hashem can help you in some way, some normal, way to help you with that. But don't ask for miracles, or, wonders. Don't ask for things like that. It's not proper to do that. And also, it's relevant also to give a thanksgiving, for something which happened in the past, that things turned out, good or whatever it was. Right? So he gives that example that we spoke about, which is that he enters into the city. So, yeah, as we said, right, some cities are dangerous, whatever it is, right? All kinds of things going on. Administration is poor, corruption, blah, 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 blah. So if he goes into the city and he says like this, right? Yiratzon min lefanecha, maybe they were before you, right? Hashem Elokeinu, Lord our God, shetachniseni lekacha leshalom, zeh leshalom. So he asks, right? Yeah, bring me into this city peacefully. Nichnas leshalom. If he went in peacefully, Omer modeh ani lefanecha, he thanks Hashem. He says, I give thanks to you, Hashem our God, Eloheinu, שהכנסתני לכך הזה לשלום. That you brought me into this town, peacefully. So far, so good, right? That's what you say. ביקש לצאת, and now when he wants to leave the city, right, at that point, אומר יהי רצון מלפניך, אדוני אלוהינו, so then he says, right, maybe there will be for you, Hashem our God, שתוציאני מכך זה לשלום, right, remove me from this town in peace. יצא בשלום. If he left in peace, אומר מודה אני לפניך אדוני אלוהי, so then he says, I give thanks to you, Hashem our God, שהוצאתני מכך זה לשלום, that you took me out of this city peacefully, וכשם שהוצאתני לשלום, כך תוליכני לשלום. Just like you brought me out from the city, and the same thing, and take me also peacefully to other places and so forth and so on. עד Baruch atah Hashem, and then right, you seal it, Shomea Tefillah, like this. Blessed are you, God, who hears the prayers. וזוהי תפילת הדרך שנכתבו היא בכל דיניה בסימן ק"י. So he says that is talking about tfilat haderech, the traveler's prayer, which was already described in chapter 110. Okay. So he's trying to incorporate this whole right system here with tfilat haderech, the traveler's prayer as well together in one package. Yeah. Okay, interesting. Honestly, I don't think I've ever said this prayer in my life. Tfilat haderech we say all the time. I'm not talking about that. But when it comes to the other stuff, which is about going into a certain city and coming out and so forth and so on, I really I've never said it. And the reason is, pretty obvious why that is. Number one is because the main point is that most of the cities that you go in and out of when you're living in the States, whatever, the administration is pretty, normal, whatever. So you have to be so, weary about being wrongfully charged about something, or being framed up, things like this, So that's the reason why we don't do it. Worst comes to worst, you're gonna get a, moving violation, right? For speeding. That's about it. So, okay. And usually they don't accuse you falsely of that. So it happens sometimes, but usually they're right. I can't tell you. It is what it is. So yeah, I remember one time in my younger days, we were going upstate, with my friends, to rest over there, whatever, vacation, and we were traveling a certain road, and we got pulled over for speeding, and I hate to say it, but they were right. We were speeding. So, so what happened, right? It was like a sort of like a little, town, little hick town, not really something very substantial there. So what they did was they took us to the judge, to be judged, So we had to actually stop over, to the judge, and he judged us, for that moving violation, and there was a fine to pay. So I think we had to pay it, if I remember correctly. That was about it, So that's usually what happens in America, things like this, moving violations, speeding, blah blah blah, things like this. Otherwise, they're not really looking, to give you trouble. Okay, so be careful, drive careful. All right, so that's that. So I guess we'll move on to the next one. If you happen to be, in a country where, one of like those third world countries, quote unquote, right? So there could be danger of all kinds of things. You never know. Mhm. Okay, great. Let's move on. Go to bed. Just looking at something before we move on. Does this apply to all the cities, or as we said, right, only cities which are corrupted? Because what we just read now is more like implying that it was only for corrupted places where they could, accuse you falsely and things like this. But what about just a regular city? Do you have to make this prayer there?
I mean, why not? Things can happen anywhere, right?
I'm sorry?
So why not? Some things can happen anywhere, right?
Yeah, you never know, but the question is, when did the rabbis require this, in a time of danger or just any location? So another important thing, to point out here is that apparently he only seals it at the end, and there he's talking about Tfilat HaDerech. So besides the Tfilat HaDerech element of it, apparently there's no other thing to bless on. It's just a prayer that you say. That's pretty much the way it comes out. But to point out, right, also that here the Tfilat HaDerech is not for the usual purpose, right? Because the usual purpose of Tfilat HaDerech is, when you're traveling from one town to another, as we already described before. Things like this, right? Traveling in the desert, or in the sea, whatever, or you're taking a flight somewhere, you're flying over to somewhere. So things like this, which are there's an element of danger. So there, we do bless Tfilat HaDerech, just like I did when I came here to Israel. And I had to say it also twice, by the way, when I was coming. You guys understand why I had to do it twice? You see the point there? So the point is like this, right? That when it comes to Tfilat HaDerech, you do have to renew it every day, So if you're traveling, right, and you haven't yet gotten to your destination until the next day, you do have to do another Tfilat HaDerech, right? In the morning, you got to do another one. That's the way it works, That's why I had to do another one because, I traveled on Tuesday and I got here on Wednesday. So it was already another day. So for the other day, I had to say another prayer. So that's the way it works to Tfilat Derech, Every day you need a new one.
So if someone were like driving across country over 2 weeks, they would say, take,
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. You have to do one every day. And then when I came in, thank God I remembered, that came in on Wednesday. So Thursday, there was a minyan, with the Sefer Torah. So I went to pray in the minyan, and then I said Gomer also, because you have to say Gomer after that. So I did Tfilat Derech twice. I did Gomel on Thursday. That's the way you do it, the way we do things today. What I wanted to say is that here, right, the contrast is that you're not saying it just because you're traveling from place to place. That's not the point. The point is that you're going into a place which is dangerous. This is the reason why we do it here. So it's the same prayer. It's still called Tfilat Derech, but it's just a different purpose. That's the thing. So I wanted to point that out. That's an important thing to explain. So the truth is, in the tour, we don't see here that, it talks about a dangerous city. It just says that it's a city. That's all. By the way, just to explain that, it's talking about a walled city, Krach. So why Dafka a walled city and not any other? Today we don't have walled cities, except the ancient ones, the ancient cities. So then what's the point of that? The point is like this, that the those walled cities are usually like very densely populated. Just like today we have today, with these urban centers, right, and so forth and so on. So those are usually the more dangerous ones. They're the ones that have the more element of danger. But when you're going into just like a small town, which is not a big, huge, urban complex, whatever, right? It's not really so dangerous there. This is the reason why he uses that language. So the question is, what about us? Like what do we do? Because as we said, we don't really have walled cities today. But I think I would venture to guess, right? We're going to see in the Shulchan Aruch more, but I would venture to guess that any like densely populated city would be called like a walled city, because it has the same kind of quality to it. Okay, that's one thing to know. So let's see what else we got here in the Torah. Yeah, so the Torah doesn't mention that the city is particularly dangerous. So where did we see that? We saw that in Bit Yosef, in the name of some other rabbis. But lo and behold, right, in the Shulchan Aruch, it doesn't. He also doesn't mention the element of the danger there. So apparently that means that we assume that there's danger in all these cities, these urban centers. Usually there's like how it is, right? These urban centers, there's usually a lot of crime there and things going on, things like that. But at the same time, we don't find that anybody does this today. Seems like it's not the custom anymore. So we got to look into it a little bit here. First of all, in the Mishnah Rule, right, what he writes about this. Yeah, let's take a look at that. Okay, so he points out all the stuff that we just mentioned here in Mishnah Berurah. He says, "Dafka lakach." So he says it's only a walled city we're talking about. The Shem Metzim Memunim Ra'im Umechapsim Alilot. So he says because there, in those walled cities, there's usually like those, bad administrations there going on. That are seeking out, to make false accusations and so forth and so on. But he says when it comes to, as we said, like a small town, that's different. As we just mentioned, right? אמר כשנכנס לה ולא אחר כך כסם ממנו אלא, ואחר כך מפסיק בדרך אומר תפילת הדרך, משום סכנת הדרכים, כמבואר לעיל סימן ק"י. So he says, right, that when it comes to a small town, which is not a big urban center, you don't have to say that, he says. Say תפילת הדרך. So what's the distinction between Tfilat HaDerech and these prayers? The distinction is that when it comes to Tfilat HaDerech, it's just, the rabbis made that because of the danger of being on the road, as we already mentioned beforehand. So here also it applies, since you're on the road, as we said. But what doesn't apply is the element of danger there, of right, false accusations, things like this. So therefore, he says regarding that, right, in a small town, we're not going to mention things like that. So you see that from Mishnah Berurah that he does hold by this concept. Um, in general, in other words, he does hold that this thing could apply today as well. It's just that it only applies in the densely populated areas, right? Which we call the walled cities in those days. Today we don't have walled cities, but we have densely populated urban centers and things like this. But again, right, we have to mention that we don't find like these false charges, in like normal countries today. They're gonna put some false charges on you. People don't do that today. Things like that. Um, so that could be the reason why the customers nowadays we don't say it. So as we said, right, we do say Tfilat HaDerech, but this prayer, seems to be already not relevant in most places that we live in today. Because there's not that element of the false accusations and the danger and all that stuff. So you know what I'll do? I'll take a look in the Yalkut Yosef just to see what he has to say about that. It's good to see, a little bit more. So let's take a look over there. Before we go over there, I just want to see what it says in the Mishnah Berurah here. It says some interesting things. לכאורה הלא בסימן ק"י מבואר בשיוצא בדרך אומר תפילת הדרך לבד ולא הודעה. Right. So in other words, he's trying to differentiate here between the usual tefillat haderech that we do, as we said, right? When you hit the road, you're going to a different town. So we say tefillat haderech on that. But here, we're not really talking about that scenario. We're talking about a case where he's already on the road and he just happened to traverse a city. So it's not exactly the same thing, apparently. That's what he's trying to say. I mean, no, מה זה שכולל זה מעיר קטנה שאין שם שאתה his conclusion here is like this. Makes sense, what he's saying. That this issue of saying Tfilat HaDerech is only talking about the dangerous places, right? So what does that mean? Usually, as we said, when do we say Tfilat HaDerech? When we hit the road, right? Going to a different town. That's usually when we do it. But here he's talking about doing it because you're traversing a city, which could be dangerous. So he says that that towns like only applies to be the big urban centers and so forth and so on. Okay, what else we got? ואם יזמן אחר כך הדרך לנסיעתו מנסה, אך אין לו מן כסף רק כשאדם. Right, so then he says also another thing, which is that if you already said Tfilat HaDerech when you hit the road, and now you got into traversed like one of these big cities, you shouldn't say it there either, because why is that? Because you've already done it, when you left home. So there's no purpose in doing it twice. So he says the only thing really you should do is give the thanksgiving, but not the blessing. So, so if that's the case, when would it apply, right? Which says Mishnah Berurah, to say Tfilat HaDerech when you traverse the city. When would that apply today? So he says it would apply if you happen to lodge in that city. And then when the morning comes, right, as we said, right, in the morning you gotta do a new Tfilat HaDerech. So there, right, you would have to do another Tfilat HaDerech because it's already a new day, as we already mentioned, right? That's what he's saying. So it pretty much fits into what we just said, this Mishnah Berurah. Pretty much the same description. Okay, what else we got here? Yeah, that's pretty much what he's saying. And and he makes right, it describes it like carefully by saying that you would what you would have to do is right in a case like that where you traverse the city and you lodge there. So what you would do is once you leave that town, you're gonna do tefillat derech. Besides the Thanksgiving, because it's already a new day, and you keep on traveling. But he says because you're traversing the town, what you would do is make that blessing as you leave, right? As we described in the Shulchan Aruch, as you get out of there. All right, sounds good to me. I'm still gonna look at the Yalkut Yosef for a second, just to see what he has to say there. Let's see what we can find. Right, so already you feel right the difference here in the Yalkut Yosef, because what does he say here? I'm not showing you the screen, but I'll just tell you what it says, unless you really want to see it. I can pull it up. If I have any requests, I'll put it up. Okay, so in the Yalkut Yosef, first of all, right, the first thing you notice is that he doesn't say a walled city, right? As we said today, we don't have walled cities. So what does he say? He says a large city, right? That's what we have today, urban centers, as we said. Right. So basically, very simple in the Yalkut Yosef. Uh, so what he says is that it still is relevant, to make these prayers, when you're going into a large city, it still is relevant. So I guess that's what a person should do, and it's not really, there's not any danger involved. So what does that mean? It's not a blessing in vain because anyway, right? There's no blessing here. It's just a prayer. So as we said, right, the only blessing that we have here is the tefillat derech. So, it's not really a problem because you say that anyway. So it's not really, a blessing in vain or anything like that, according to the way the Mishnah Berurah explained it. So therefore, that's it. I think that makes sense. It comes together pretty well. So bottom line, right, is that Yalkut Yosef says it still is relevant, to make these prayers when you go through like an urban center. Got nothing to lose. There's no blessing there. So you got nothing. Got nothing to lose. So what does that mean? Right? You learn from here a concept also. The concept is that, the rabbis considered urban centers, places of danger. Uh, and we see that until this day, right? We have a high crime rate over there, usually in places like that. So there is some element of that in these places. But as we said, right, when it comes to, false charges, that far, usually it doesn't go that far. False accusations and all kinds of stuff like that. But anyway, it doesn't hurt you to say these prayers. I got nothing to lose with them. So you should, I guess. That's about it. It's interesting. Okay, great. So we'll go back to the halacha. go back to the chapter here that we're in. So if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I'll move on. Okay, so next halacha, right, is an interesting one. Not something that we encounter very often today, but let's take a look at it anyway. So I'll read it inside the tour to get the whole text. It says, "Anichnas lamud gorno." Right. So what is he talking about here? He's going in, right, to measure his granary. Right. So what does that mean? What is that talking about? That he but that's why it's not really so relevant. But anyway, right, he's going in there into his granary, right, where he's got his grains, which he already, harvested, right, and he's, going to measure the amount, right. So he makes a prayer there, on this. אומר, יהי רצון מלפניך, אדוני אלוהי, שתשלח ברכה בפרי, בכלי הזה. So he prays to God, when he comes to measure it, that Hashem should send blessing, to this pile of grain. So why does he do that? Uh, there's like a concept to learn from here as well. The concept is, right, that the rabbis already told us, right, in the Talmud, anything, which is measured, there's evil eye, which comes on that thing when you measure it, right? So you're coming to measure your grain, so it does, involve some evil eye. In other words, you can put it on yourself as well. That's also called evil eye. So therefore, right, the sages say, to make this prayer that the evil eye should not fall on these grains. So what does that mean? That it shouldn't be damaged by the evil eye, and then uh, have some damage, regarding rotting and all kinds of other things, which can happen to it, damages, all kinds of things. So therefore, you say to Hashem, right, send blessing, to this grain, that it shouldn't be damaged like that with evil eye. That's what it's all about. Okay, so as we said, right, most of us are not doing farming these days. But anyway, it's a good concept to understand, right? That there is evil eye, when it comes to these things. There's also another general rule which we learn, right, from this, which is that the rabbis say, that the evil eye comes only on things which are measured and counted. So therefore, a person, who has certain, right, assets or properties or, things like this, right? You shouldn't keep counting them all the time, like measuring them for no reason. If he needs to measure it, there's a need for it. Okay, fine, But if not, don't measure it all the time. Don't keep measuring all the time, because you're putting an evil eye on it by you keep measuring it again and again and again. Why keep measuring it for what? You already know how much is there. So now what are you measuring it for? Just what? You looking for trouble? That's the whole idea, you know. So what do you call it? What I wanted to say is that that's why smart people will tell you if you have some like money, in your wallet, right? Or let's say even if in your bank account, like stop, looking there, counting the money all the time. Like oh, let me, you already know how much money you got in there. Why are you counting it again? I mean, looking for trouble. Don't keep counting your money. Don't keep, examining your bank account, and this and that, like measuring everything, because this puts an evil eye on it. That's a concept that we learn from here, practical concept, which can apply even today, and it does. Okay, so what else we got here? So, so once he starts to measure, he says, "Yitchil amud," right? Once he starts to measure it, Omer, he also says something there, right? Baruch HaSholeach bracha b'kli hazeh. Blessed is the one who sends blessing in this pile of grain, whatever, right? Madad, once he measures it, brecha kach berach harazo tfilat shav. But he says if he already measured it, and then blessed again afterwards, that would be a blessing in vain, or not a prayer in vain. So same thing, right? In other words, you're already blessing on something which was in the past. שאין הברכה מצויה אלא בדבר הסמוי מן העין. So he says, because the blessing is, as we just mentioned, right, is only found with something which is hidden from the eye. So that's what we don't want. Constant measuring, correct, constant counting of something, that puts evil eye on it. נכנס למרחץ אומר, right, so that's one thing. So let's take a look at Bet Yosef on that. So it says here, regarding this whole thing, Perek Kama the Taniot, right? It's in the first Perek of Tanit, in the Bracha there. I'm sorry, in the Gemara, Chet Amud Bet, Ubesov Perek Hamafkid, also this Perek, right? Mem Bet Amud Aleph. Okay, great. So that's the Gemara that comes from. So let's take a look at the Shulchan Aruch. So it says Shulchan Aruch like this. Hanichnas lamud et gorno, right? When he comes in to measure his granary, how much grains he has in there, right? So forth and so on. Omer, יהי רצון מלפניך, אדוני אלוהי, שתשלח ברכה בכלי הזה. As we said, right? What does he say? He requests from Hashem that you should send blessing, to this pile. So meaning what? That it shouldn't be damaged, by evil eye, whatever, things like this. Right? Hitchil lamud. Once he starts to measure it, what does he say? Omer Baruch HaSholech Bracha B'Richi Zeh. He says, blessed is the one that sends a blessing into this pile, right? So the question is, does he make this blessing with the name of God and the kingdom? So let's take a look at Mishnah Berurah, right? What it says. So Mishnah Berurah says, "Belo askat Hashem," right? You shouldn't mention the name of God with this blessing, right? In other words, just say it without, more like a prayer, more than like a blessing. Don't mention the name of God. Don't mention the kingdom. Shem Malchut. So he also gives a reason why we don't, mention the name of God in the Malchut, the kingdom, right? So he says, because there, right, when we were doing things like that, when was that? When did that apply? When we were doing the mitzvah of Maaser, he says. We were measuring the pile of grain to take Maaser. So there's a mitzvah involved, right? And he says that Hashem assured us, when it comes to that there's going to be blessing on it because of this Maaser, the tithe that you take from this grain. So that's why, there it was more relevant to say it as a full blessing. But since it's not relevant to say it as a full blessing in our times, because we don't do maaser, so therefore he says, you should say it without the name of God, right? So, the truth is, right, that we in Chutz La'aretz, right, in the diaspora, we don't take maaser. There's no mitzvah of maaser, but in Eretz Israel we do. So what about over there, right? Maybe we should say it there, right? With the name of God and everything. So I would venture to theorize here that we're not going to do it either anyway. Why is that? Because even though we do take Maaser in Eretz Israel, but it's only Derabanan, it's only rabbinical, So since it's only rabbinical, there's really, no assurance from God, regarding the blessing, because it's not from the Torah. Apparently, nowadays, we're not going to do it regardless, right? Whether it's in Eretz Israel or outside, because it's not, it's not from the Torah, this whole thing, right? Maaser and all that stuff. Okay, great. I think that's already a good insight into this whole thing here. So let's see what else we got. And then he adds, right, in the Shulchan Aruch, as we already mentioned before, Madad ve'achakach berach harazeh tfilat shav. If he measured and then, right, he blessed, that would be a blessing in vain, right? A prayer in vain, right? And by the way, that also implies, that there's no blessing here because, right, with the name of God and everything, because otherwise it would be a blessing in vain. But it doesn't say blessing in vain; it says a prayer in vain, right? Why? Because it's not really a blessing since you're not mentioning the name of God. So he says, what's the purpose of that? Because it's already something in the past, so you shouldn't be saying that. And then he also mentions, right, what we said is that blessing is only found which in things which are hidden from the eye, and this is the reason why, as we said, right, we don't really want to, keep counting and measuring things which are not necessary to do that. Okay, great. So let's see what else we got here. Okay, so we have a little bit more, but I guess we're not going to finish this today. So, Bezrat Hashem, we'll leave it for next time. So thanks for coming. Be blessed with wealth and health and happiness. Laila Tov, Chazak Baruch. Hopefully, Bezrat Hashem, we'll do another class tomorrow. I'll try to keep my body awake, right, so we can get this thing done. Bezrat Hashem. So I'll be back Thursday, like in the evening. So. I'm not even sure if I'll be on time, for the class on Thursday when I get back, but I'll try, if I can, to get the class done on Thursday in New York, when I get back, B'ezrat Hashem. Okay, so thanks for coming. Chazak Baruch. We'll see you next time, B'ezrat Hashem. I'll keep you informed about my schedule, and thanks for coming. Chodesh Tov.
Chodesh Tov.
Borach.
Thank you.
Let us show.
Borach.